Every school kid knows that arachnids are dangerous.
You had very specialized bugs who would do specialized things. They came up with the warrior caste. These were the infantrymen, the foot soldiers of the bug world.
We knew that warriors were going to be like our Chevys. That's the bug you're going to use everywhere, right? If you're going to have a bug in a shot, it's probably going to be a warrior bug.
They seem not to have any other task than to fight. So they are the protectors of the planet, if you want so. And these are the ones that are in the foreground, like with ants. You know, you have warrior ants and you have other kind of ants. You have ants that help in the nursery, and other ones are doing fighting. We only designed the bugs that were the fighting bugs, because we felt that the movie was about that.
We designed the warrior bug to be a disposable bug. You know, it had to be very light geometrically. It had to have a pretty standard kind of a model. The animators had to be able to, you know, have standardized like Bible studies for it. It had to have very few, actually no elastic membranes. So it was designed to be jointed. Our maquette crew was able to do a great job of actually taking every single part in our little sculpture and make sure it did go through the range of movement that we would need, so that when we put it in the computer and built that model, it would already be proofed out. So the warrior bug was our standard bug. We kind of hit that one first and, you know, sort of developed it to be super lightweight.
Yeah, the big boom shot when the arachnid army first shows up at Planet P was actually our very first shot on Starship Troopers, and I thought it was the beginning of the end. I thought, you know, if every shot is like this, we're absolutely doomed, because it was a big boom up shot, and once the camera boom got up there, the camera was just going like this.
We had to do this shot, and it was not stable. And said, okay, we shoot it and let's see, Phil Tippett has to handle it somehow.
Mark!
Problem was, it was always very windy there. And on a very extended crane arm, if there is some wind, the camera is not really stable. The whole crane starts shaking a little bit.
The perspective through the lens made the background look like it was locked off, but it made the foreground look like these guys were on a boat going up and down. And it took weeks of just matching everything in just to make sure that we were able to stabilize the background so we could put the bugs in.
All this shakiness, this was sort of strictly forbidden because it created terrible problems. How you know, to shake all the 1,000 bugs in exactly the same way. Frame by frame by frame by frame, he has to correct whatever the camera is doing. So we had markers in the landscape, which were taken out later on, of course, that you were able to follow even these little camera movements.
Sometimes we'll have a big cardboard stand-in that roughly has the shape of the characters, and we'll bring that in to roughly match the shape and perspective of the characters. A lot of times that gets very unwieldy. Most of these bugs were huge, and to have a big object that you have to move around is kind of prohibitive. So we have these things that we call the monster sticks, which are 12 to 15 foot 2x4s to indicate the approximate space that the object is in, so that Jos and Paul can frame to that. And we'll usually walk it through the shot, do a walkthrough, and film that.
A great deal of the work in Starship Troopers was in replicating what Phil and his team had already designed in the computer world. He would supply us with small-scale maquettes, small-scale sculptures, and we actually cut those all into separate sections and took measurements and proportionally did blow-ups. So it was a very mathematical procedure to arrive at the proper scale of blowing up those creatures so that they looked entirely accurate once they got to the full-scale realm, which is what we were involved with. And we had a whole team of mechanical people, hydraulic experts and computer experts, because we needed to rely on the computer to help sort of be the buffer between mechanically what our creature could do and performance-wise what the puppeteers are trying to make it do. With the design of these creatures, it was entirely probable that the attacking claws in these creatures could come right in front of their jaws and they could bite down on their own claws. Hydraulics are fast enough and powerful enough that it would have been major damage, so we had a program that was designed so that certain appendages had priority over others. So, for example, no matter what the puppeteers were bent on doing, it was entirely impossible. Once that claw started to come over, the jaw would automatically move out of the way, no matter what the puppeteers were doing.
Action!
There were also safety systems that were built with the actors in mind that had to perform around these things.
Cut that, cut!
It's one thing to watch the movie, it's another completely different thing to actually be there. It's very unnerving on the set, or in the case of a lot of our early rehearsals, to be that close to something that big and moving that fast, and with the power of hydraulics, there's a lot of responsibility that goes into it.
If the arachnids are the warriors, then the tanker bugs, and that's why the word tanker bug, are corresponded to tanks. The tanks they used in the Second World War, where they would shoot a gas, and they would go over a distance of 30, 40 yards, like the tanker bug is doing this, whoosh, that comes out of his mouth. That's based on that. So we copied these things, but also always try to translate them in biological terms.
Since they're mobile flamethrowers, basically, and, you know, battering rams and everything else, they had this big belly section that had a lot of little legs on it. The front section there's got all the big legs, so it's real movable and posable and stuff. And then the head, yeah, it's got the actual flamethrower. So the idea there was that the belly was like the reservoir for the catalytic juices, and they would be ducted through the body and out through the kind of the aiming device there.
A stink bug will defend its territory and its life by expelling a really foul-smelling liquid, and the tanker bugs do that. It just happens to be acid that's ignited by, you know, a biological little flint igniter thing that's between their eyes.
We, in some cases, went for a little bit more of a stylized look, although there is no realistic, you know, being melted by a tanker bug, because doesn't really exist. But we decided even then to try something not quite as realistic as maybe could have been attained, because, you know, at a certain point you're just getting into too much gore. ADI built a big like RV-sized tanker bug back that was huge, and it was on this bulldozer, and they actually did tests and they wired them up to it. They had guy wires and stuff, and a couple of those shots are in the picture. But for a lot of the shots, there was no way you're going to be able to choreograph this tractor and the bug, you know, so we made the decision to go all digital with it. So most of the sequence, especially the long shots when you see the bug, you know, other than just his back, that's all digital Johnny Rico. That was our most successful use at that date of a digital stunt double.
Well, the hopper bugs don't really fly. I mean, they're called hoppers because they hop. They have these back legs that fold up, and they can propel themselves up, and they catch air drafts and can soar. Paul liked the hopper bugs because they could decapitate people.
The hoppers were, in a sense, the Army Air Corps of the bugs. They were the death from above. If you look at their form, they look very much like the warrior bugs that are on the ground. Each one of these insects is the result of a long process of controlled breeding.
We took the warrior bugs and cut a lot of the parts up and rearranged them, and then kind of re-scanned them in, but they were built to be like a hybrid version of the warrior. They were a flying warrior bug. And we tried to give them like a more of a unusual kind of a paint job, since there's something that can fly, and drew a lot on a lot of the beetles that have these refractive kind of coatings on them, mainly to sort of insinuate that the things had like a different kind of an alloy, or they were a lightweight version, you know, so that they could actually fly or glide.
Paul wanted the leading edge of the hopper's wings to be like razor blades so they could chop people's heads off. We had been doing a number of pre-visualizations for these scenes that we call animatics, that kind of lay out the choreography of some of the more complicated motions and cuts. And then sometimes in the case of the hoppers, to determine how fast they fly. How fast does a 20-foot bug fly? I mean, how fast do we need it to fly? We needed to create these animatics for airspeed. We had these pre-visualizations that we were working on. It wasn't very difficult to make a little computer graphic human being and have a hopper come in and have his head, you know, fly off.
I'm always asked to do things like cut off heads and stuff like that, you know, when we do these kind of bug war pictures. But with this one, we wanted to do it a little bit differently. So we just, instead of taking it off here, we decided, you know, it would be more effective just to have someone chop right across there. So we had to build a puppet again for that, where we had to, we basically yank lined it off. Action, pose! The top of the head fit together, and it had to have some, you know, body motion, you know, and it had to turn around and react with the gun. And as it spins around, it, you know, it's got this sort of expression. And later, Phil Tippett went back in for the close-up of that head and digitally put in a wing, a hopper wing that comes by and slices it off.
Well, the plasma bugs can have this huge chemical reaction take place in their body and then fire this plasma charge into space through a sphincter.
Phil Tippett's people handled the actual digital creation of those bugs themselves and the shots of them expelling the plasma into space, which, if you look closely, you'll see that as that plasma starts to leave the atmosphere, some of it is on the edges of it solidifying. It's as if the air, it's not with the main mass, and it's slowly turning into the lava, this like chunks of lava, and falling back to Earth. It's like something that's a throwaway again, but it makes it very realistic.
We did a lot of work on those things. They were essentially the heavy artillery, so the idea there was to just give them as much scale and weight and make them feel like one of these giant howitzers on tracks that the Nazis had in World War II, just giant pieces of heavy armament.
Brain bugs, frankly, I find the idea of a bug that thinks offensive.
The brain bug was the evil, emperor of the bug world. I guess the chip or the CPU, as everybody kind of thought.
And the moment you see it go up, you go slowly down and then move out. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Paul, from the very beginning, was very insistent that it be very offensive to everybody. Its mouth had, or whatever it was supposed to look like something. Paul would say, well, perhaps it should look like a vagina, or perhaps it should look like an anus, but I don't know. And so we ended up calling this the face or the structure of this thing the poogina. That was our characterization of it.
It seems like in retrospect, everybody's kind of blaming everybody else, How did that thing end up looking like a giant, whatever that is, But at the time, it was a little bit of, everybody was there, and it was sometimes, this part here could be a bit more, perhaps.
Early on, Paul was saying, well, it's like a Lovecraft thing, like this horrible Cthulhu type. It's the god of the insect people.
A lot of the inspiration was drawn from some of the earlier film noir movies, such as Touch of Evil, Orson Welles' character, or some of these guys, kind of a corpulent, over big boss. So we started with that idea, kind of a cross between, say, Orson Welles and a giant grub. Kind of a huge, overweight, soft, really not so functional type bug. So we quickly established an overall kind of scale. It's got to be a big, imposing kind of a character. Started getting some of the disgusting aspects of it worked out. It's a soft, kind of pulpy thing with rippling waves to kind of simulate thought or the thought process or some kind of organic process going on there. Multiple eyes, again, kind of a spider type, attribute there. Some feeder claws and miscellaneous little claws, to help kind of keep himself clean and tend to him. And then ultimately the mouth, which the palp extends from. The palp, obviously, is the device that's used to kind of poke you in the brain and suck all your knowledge out.
It had a lot of unusual kind of staging because a lot of the people basically get thrown onto the ground. You go to see the king, well, you got to kneel, right? So the brain bug has a kind of a similar treatment. You don't just stand in front of the brain bug, you're on the ground. So that meant that, well, if these people are going to be kneeling and stuff, we have to play some of the stuff a little bit differently. We got to play the face a little bit closer to the ground. It doesn't have to be armored, it's not that kind of thing. It's a brain, so it's very soft, can hardly even move itself around. He's too big, in fact, to really transfer much, right? So he's carried on a carpet. When you saw those chariot bugs, then you knew that the king was coming. So that's how the sequences begin.
In trying to implement this character, we went through a maquette phase where we would create something like this, talk to Paul when it's in a rough stage, say, well, what do you think about this? We'd kind of get down low, look at it, say, well, is that going to be disgusting enough, and everything like that. And once that design has been finalized, this piece then, for instance, is put onto a digitizing arm, kind of like a 3D pantograph, and we pick points off the surface, enter them into the computer to create, ultimately, a wireframe computer model. It's not too complex. It allows the animators to be able to move it around and not have to really suffer any kind of a speed penalty.
In the wider shots, when you see the brain moving around more, then it's a digital image, and it's Phil Tippett. For the close-ups, it's ADI. It was difficult because you had to match them so that that you would not feel a difference between the colors and the sliminess and all these things. So it was pretty tricky work to make the ADI stuff fit into the wider shots.
We sculpted him out of a urethane foam. It was a lightweight foam, and it was a good thing to do instead of going with clay. Clay requires heavy armatures and tons of clay when you get to something as big as that. And ultimately, from that lightweight foam sculpture, we made a giant multi-piece fiberglass mold. to produce the inch-thick skins, foam latex skins. We had to break it into pieces, and then once the foam latex skins were made, we had to stitch it all together over the core of the brain bug and then patch it. Simultaneous to that, mechanizing was going on. And the great thing about the brain bug was that it was so huge, we could put puppeteers inside of it. So we were able to fit 5 puppeteers inside there. They did some manual operating of eyes, for instance, and the mouth. The stinger that comes out and sucks people's brains out was in part manually controlled. In addition to that, there was a lot of servo actuation of little feelers and feeders and things. What was great about that brain bug was it was such a non-anthropomorphic face, and yet we had to get a performance out of it. You know, we had to make it look scared, we had to make it look imperious, we had to make it look frightening. And that was a challenge, to have 5 people inside and a couple more people outside and coming up with very specific, counted out, you know, performance beats that would give that look.
In a word, disgusting.
We had to take Patrick Muldoon's head cast 2 expressions. We did one sort of a grimacing looking face for the impact of the palp stinger hitting the head. There's a cutaway, and then we switched out puppets, and there's a brain-sucking puppet that we had built. And with that one, we had to work with ADI. They provided the palp stinger for us, and then it was all hollow and painted. We had to run, essentially it was like, you know, those wiener dog things, or wieners that are all in a string. It was that. It was like, except it was brain matter all kind of strung together in a string line that we mounted inside of our puppet and pulled it through their stinger and all the way out. While that was happening, we also had a mechanism inside that actually sucked the eyes back in, as if there's so much pressure from the brain bug, it was sucking out, you know, eyeballs and tongue and everything else that's in the head.
It's afraid!